Welcome back to another episode of Sexy Theology. I'm your host, Austin Molt, and the date today is November 6th, which means yesterday was Election Day, and we found out last night that Donald J. Trump beat Kamala Harris, and he will be our next president. Now, I recorded this podcast about Christianity and politics, and I recorded it, probably 5 or 6 days ago at this point, and it was meant to be uploaded 2 days ago, but stuff came up where I wasn't able to do that, and it was a pretty big file. And so anyways, all that being said, this was meant to be uploaded yesterday or the day before, but I'm going to upload it today because my buddy Chris Corrado joins me, who is involved in politics in a kind of unique way. And we talk about a bunch of different issues, and really there was a bunch of stuff that we wish we could have covered. We just ran out of time. With that being said, I want to give a few qualifiers, though, for the episode, because I know that not everybody may not be able to listen to the whole thing all the way through. And I'm not scared about pushback per se. What I do want to do is I want to frame this conversation in a particular way. Number one, I believe that Christians should absolutely be united. There are so many forces of evil and things coming against Christians right now in our culture and in our world. The last thing we need is for more and more Christians to be offended with each other. Being offended is not a fruit of the Spirit. So let's so listen to this with an open heart. Number two, I don't think Christianity is perfectly synonymous with conservatism. So I agree there. I also do think at the same time that a lot of Democrats, and not all Democrats, but a lot of Democrats, some of their policies and viewpoints on sexuality and identity and the border and things of that nature have gone way too far. And I know this because some of my friends who would be left-leaning of center, they would be a Democrat, they would be closer to what we might call now a classic liberal. You know, they agree on free speech, they agree on points around the Constitution and whatnot, but they might disagree with, tax brackets. They might disagree with, some minor social issues. But we agree on the core fundamentals of the faith. Not core fundamentals of the faith, core fundamentals of political philosophy. So, but I do think part of the left has gone way too far. So we talk about that. I also want to say, just to be fair to both sides, that the right can be just as cringy sometimes. In fact, if you're watching this, you'll be able to see it. If not, you'll be able to listen to it. But I saw this TikTok video because a buddy of mine sent it to me. And it's a minute and a half long. I'm not going to play the whole thing, probably like the first 40 seconds. The guy puts together 3 different, I think, Christian creators and how they're all essentially saying the same thing about Kamala Harris, and then he comments on it. But let me just play this. Okay.
Did a demonic creature just shapeshift at a Kamala Harris rally?
Did a demonic creature just manifest at one of Kamala Harris's rallies?
A demon manifesting on live television at Kamala's rally.
Some might say he's just looking at the Jumbotron, but the thermal reading shows otherwise.
Many people didn't believe that this could be a shape-shifting creature at first, until they put this footage under a thermal camera.
Christianity is one big family. When I say my brothers and sisters in Christ, I mean it. Big Nick and Gabe Perot and whoever that other guy is, they're my brothers in Christ. And in the same way that my family had to apologize when my cousin went streaking at a local junior varsity football game, or the time we had to apologize for my other cousin when he went Walter White, true story, I'm here to apologize to you all for my brother Big Nick and my brother Gabe and my brother the other guy. Because what was that? There may be people out there that are saying, Josh, you're discouraging these guys from making Christian content. And I want to set the record completely straight on that. I absolutely am. I am discouraging people from making this type of content. It's not Christian, whatever type of content it is, I am discouraging it. You know why? Because they're making our family look bad. We're brothers and sisters in Christ, right? You're making our family look mentally insane. You make us look like we belong in a psych ward. So stop, please. please stop.
I've seen a few of this guy's stuff. He's great. Listen, that is just so stupid. I mean, making these videos, and why they all have the same template. And sometimes Christian conservative guys, which I would call myself a Christian conservative politically and theologically, it's like, bro, why are we like going to like why? You know, it's like, did you know that Kamala Harris is actually a shapeshifter and she's, you know, demonically possessed? And it's like, hey, you know, it's like, let's be fair. There is probably there's probably people on both sides of the aisle that are demonically influenced. Do I know that for sure? Do I know who those people are? No. What I'm looking at is the policies on the left and the right in terms of the ticket. And there's a lot of nuance, and I understand that. And that is the end of some of my qualifying statements. So let's not be like this guy, okay, in the video. That's all. All right. Enough with the preface. Let's jump into the content of the podcast. Hope you enjoyed the episode. All right, welcome everybody to another episode. I'm here with my friend Chris. Chris, how's it going?
It's good, man. Thanks for having me here.
Yes.
I would say it's technically my first time doing a podcast, but this is actually my second.
I know.
But it's all good. I'm glad to be here. So.
We did this a while back. Mm-hmm. There was an audio issue, and
I didn't say that to call you out.
No. I'm just letting people know this is not our first time. But actually, I think. Well, I mean, last time we talked a little about politics, but I feel like we just kind of stayed on the surface a little bit. I mean, it was good. But being in election season right now, it feels way more potent. So,
sure.
And maybe more relevant to the cultural conversation. But
right.
Maybe explain to people a little bit about who you are and some of your interests in the political philosophy and things like that.
People are like, why are you talking to this guy about politics? You see, so yeah, my name is Chris Corrado, and I'm from the Tri-Cities. I grew up. I was born just outside of Seattle, but basically grew up in Richland, and went to Richland High School. After a couple of years at Gonzaga, I decided I wanted to make movies for a living. I moved to Los Angeles, California, and spent years in Hollywood, working first as a production assistant, but then as a Directors Guild second assistant director. And so did a lot of great projects and things like that, but got a little disillusioned with Hollywood and just California in general. And so in 2014, the very beginning of 2014, at the time I was married, and my ex and I moved to Austin. And so I essentially had left the film industry and maybe spent about a year kind of flailing a little bit professionally and kind of not really sure where I would land professionally. But I had this background in media production, video and film and stuff. And I don't know, and I think I had developed a bit of a passion for politics. I mean, I would have called myself, if you had asked me pre-2009, I would have just said I'm a Republican, but I couldn't have really articulated why that was. I was raised in a house that
right.
we were Republicans, but I didn't even know what that meant. And so in, I'd say maybe 2009 is when I read Mark Levin's book, Liberty and Tyranny. And out of, there's a few different books, maybe 4, that I could say I consider life-changing books. And Liberty and Tyranny was that one in the political sphere for me. I just think Levin is a brilliant mind when it comes to the Constitution and liberty. And so it really, and I think also it was around the same time that I saw the rise of Barack Obama, and I just took notice that he hadn't been a senator for, I think he had just been elected the previous cycle, and people were basically lauding him as this like incredible like statesman, like the savior of the Democrat Party, and I was just kind of like, but he hasn't governed anything. Like, what is his what is his background? What are his qualifications? And it just made me question it enough to start digging into political philosophy in general. And I'm kind of a nerd about philosophy. I like talking about meaning and the nature of truth and that kind of stuff. And so to be able to apply that to the political sphere, I don't know. I just got into it the same way I got kind of into apologetics in my early 20s, and I discovered C.S. Lewis, and it was like, ooh, there's actually good arguments for these ideas and policies. And so, it was just kind of like that little bit of truth that got in and sort of like a crowbar, just kind of opened up my mind enough to start really absorbing stuff. And then I really got into Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman and and Andrew Breitbart, who I actually randomly like met on the set of one of the movies I was working on. One of my favorite stories in Hollywood. I was the second assistant director of a very bad adaptation of the book Atlas Shrugged.
Okay.
And you can make movies about how you could write books about how not to make a movie based on my experience on that film. And so, but one of the actors, a really great English actor named Matthew Marsden, he came to me one day and he said, "Chris, can you? I have a friend coming to set. Will you greet him and just bring him here and
But
bring
didn't
him to
mention
me?"
who.
And I said, "Oh yeah, no problem." And this is 2010.
Okay.
And so Breitbart wasn't quite a household name yet. And I got out my pad and paper and I said, "Sure, what's your friend's name?" He goes, "His name's Andrew, his last name is Breitbart." And I literally froze and I looked at him and I said, "Your friend is Andrew Breitbart?" And he looks at me and he goes, "How do you know who Andrew Breitbart is?" And it was like we suddenly did the secret Hollywood conservative handshake.
Did we just become best friends?
Yeah. And so he came. Andrew Breitbart came to set. He talked to me. Literally one-on-one for about 30 minutes while we were in some downtime. He asked for my card, and I was like, "What? I don't have a card. Like I'm just some set guy. Like who am I?" But yeah, in fact, his book. He wrote a book called Righteous Indignation, which, as I sit here now, is the only book I've ever read cover to cover in one sitting. Like
wow!
I literally just burned through it one day.
Really?
Yeah. It was
so, that good.
So well done. Yeah.
Okay.
But it was also about his life a little bit and his story. I'm kind of fascinated with stories of people who underwent like a political conversion, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of very
feels like it's happening a lot more the last
year
or two. Yeah.
There are a lot of prominent conservative minds that spent a decent part of their lives on the other side of the debate that were former liberals who Breitbart was one of them who I think he was 44, 46 when he passed away in 2011, sadly. But Andrew Breitbart, Ronald Reagan was a former Democrat. Milton Friedman was formerly on the left. Thomas Sowell, who's one of the most celebrated economists among conservatives, he used to be a Marxist. He called himself a Marxist. And so I worked with David Mamet in Hollywood, who's a very well-known playwright and director in his own right. He actually took out an op-ed in a paper in L.A. called The Village Voice and said, and titled it "Why I'm No Longer a Brain-Dead Liberal," and it was a real pushback to most of Hollywood, and so just to be around these kind of people, and what's interesting too is how many of them not only did they have a conversion, but in such a profound way that they ended up becoming these like thought leaders,
right?
And you see the same thing in the church, people who were formerly atheists who become believers and have these amazing testimonies, and it's just very rare, at least in the political world, that you see that in the opposite direction. I can't name hardly any prominent people on the left who were former conservatives. Maybe a couple, like maybe Joe Scarborough. But just. It's quite rare in comparison. So anyway, so I was sorry I got off track.
No, you're good. Yeah.
So my ex and I moved to Austin, Texas. Floundered a little bit professionally, but I ended up deciding. I heard a rumor that Senator Ted Cruz was going to run for president.
Okay.
And this is maybe February of 2015. And so I literally sent a cold email. I've never worked a day in politics in my life.
Right.
I sent a cold email to like info@cruz.senate.gov. And I said, "Hey, here's my name. Here's my background. I'm looking
I'm not a crazy person." Yeah.
So I'm looking for some work, and I'd love to be a part of, if I heard a rumor he might run, and if he is, I'd love to be a part of it. I said, I'll volunteer, I'll make coffee, I'll do whatever it is. I even have a whole video of Senator Cruz telling a group of volunteers this story, and I kind of waited a while. I emailed them again, and finally someone got back to me. But long story short is I ended up landing a job as the campaign videographer for Senator Cruz's presidential campaign. It was my
so cool,
first job ever in politics.
Yeah.
Right? And I vividly remember getting the job, they kind of gave me a test video. They asked me to do a video with Senator Cruz, his wife Heidi, and his mom Eleanor to celebrate Mother's Day. And so I went there and did all the camera work, and Senator Cruz's spokesman at the time, a guy named Rick Tyler, kind of prompted him with questions to get him talking and stuff, and I just did the camera work and cut it together, and the campaign loved it. And so I got the job, and then literally the next weekend I was on a plane flying to New Hampshire and Massachusetts for a weekend of events with him, and I came back to the office the following week, and our campaign manager, Jeff Rowe, who's an amazing, kind of one of the best Republican strategists in the country, just looked at me and said, "Dude, you've been here a week. You're already traveling across the country with a senator." He's like, "Get off the rocket ship," you know? So for me, being a little bit of a political nerd and having quite a, I looked up to Senator Cruz a lot. I was kind of beside myself. And so, so going from Hollywood to,
what a contrast.
Yeah, but it was just like, I mean, I was on the 4th Indiana Jones film when I became a Directors Guild assistant director, and one of my kind of prized possessions is the call sheet from that day where it had all the stuff we were going to shoot that day. It's the first call sheet that I was ever listed as an official second assistant director, and Steven Spielberg signed it for me.
Oh, wow.
It actually says, "Dear Chris, today you're a man." And so the reason I bring that up is that whether it was Hollywood or it was politics, it's kind of like the one place where I absolutely know God has had a hand in my life is in my professional life. It's just the places that I found myself are just like, I know I didn't do that on my own.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I mean, yeah, what a cool story. And we've talked, and so like you've told me more of some of the details and whatnot of the California, and the transition. And there's some really cool stories in there that kind of fill in a lot of the gaps. But so that makes sense. And I just kind of want to give you some time just to allow yourself to explain and speak on, hey, here's why I'm passionate about this. And I have gotten more passionate about politics the older I've gotten, and philosophy. For some reason, those have gone hand in hand for me. I'm actually reading right now a book called The Philosophy of Tolkien. So that's kind of exciting.
Yeah.
I like Tolkien and I like philosophy. So one of my favorite authors over the last few years is he's a Catholic professor at Boston College, and he teaches philosophy. And I love his stuff. And he talks about philosophy and theology. They're two sides of the same coin. So anyways.
Well, it's I mean, it to me, politics and philosophy just are inextricably linked, because how you govern a people, how you choose to govern a people is going to determine a lot on what you believe about human nature.
Right.
And so it really gets down to, I mean, I love the, I'm paraphrasing because I don't know this quote exactly, but it's from the Federalist Papers, where it says, if men were angels, we wouldn't need anyone to govern us, but we're not, we're imperfect, and yet so are the leaders that we elect.
Yes.
And so you need the brilliance of the founders was to create a system of checks and balances where we could kind of create a system of, ideally, of fair play, that citizens could have large kind of liberty to live their lives as they would see fit, given very basic ground rules, but also that there would be rules and checks and balances that would apply to the people that we put in power. The American idea was sort of that the individual was sovereign, and that we lend our power to the government, and so, I think, if you have, I don't know, I think that's one of the fundamental differences between how conservatives and liberals think. If you were to ask conservatives what they think about human nature, they would say, well, that man is basically flawed and imperfect. Right. And so we need to at least create a system where our good natures are encouraged and, the negative side of humanity is kind of discouraged. Thomas Sowell referred to that as the constrained vision.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas the unconstrained vision, or the kind of the people on the left tend to, I always have to say,
right.
Not all of them, but tend to have a more unconstrained vision, this idea that people are inherently good, left to our own devices, we will do all sorts of wonderful things on our own,
And typically, I feel like what I hear today a lot of is, well, the reason people do bad is just because of oppression. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we are inherently good. They may not say it like that, but that is the implication, kind of.
Right.
Yeah, what they're saying.
Which is funny because you think about the implication of that. People behave in bad ways because of oppression. Right. But if we believe already that oppression is a bad thing to do,
right,
who's to say that those people oppressed because of their own oppression? You know, it's kind of like how you can take the kind of victim mindset as far as you can. And I think too, also, C.S. Lewis had a great quote where he said, explanation of cause is not justification by reason. So like there's different ways of explaining something, right?
That's a great quote.
So you can say, okay, yes, this person, what was the one he told I think it was a guy named John Lennox who told this great story about Holmes and Watson. Great, Holmes and Watson laying down one night and they're looking up at the stars and he says, Watson, as you look up at the stars, what does it tell you? And he says, well, philosophically, it tells me that we're very small in the universe and there's a great God above us. And he goes into all this stuff and he says, why? What does it tell you? And he says, well, Watson, someone has stolen our tent. So just the idea that there's different explanations for the same thing. So someone can say, oh, this person committed all these crimes because they're oppressed. Okay, there may be some influence to that, some truth to that, but it also is because they made a decision to commit those crimes. Right. There's a lot of people who are oppressed who don't go on to commit crimes. So I think the way that people on the left tend to use whatever the least accusatory explanation is the one that, unless, of course, it's someone that they disagree with politically. And then it's the complete opposite. And then it's like, well, they did this because they're a horrible, racist, homophobe, whatever it is. And so it makes it more and more difficult to actually have meaningful conversations when you have such polarization that way. So
absolutely. Well, so we'll jump into it and maybe into the nitty gritty here. My wife was on this app, maybe you've heard of, called TikTok the other day. And this,
to be fair, I don't have a TikTok. I've never TikToked. Partially because I can't dance.
Right. Yeah. And so I'm like, can you download that? And then I was like, and now text it to me. And so I'm going to play this clip real quick. And it's kind of funny. Now, part of the reason I'm playing this is because it's kind of funny. I don't want people to take this too seriously. But here, let me play it. Here, I'll hand it over to you.
Trump or Kamala?
Kamala.
Okay, and why?
Because she's cool.
That's what my parents told me.
Not a felon either, so we'll take our wins where we can.
Yeah.
Is there anything you like about her, like her policies or?
Our political science roommate's really big on her.
So we stand with her.
So you got that loyalty with your roommate?
Yes.
She's protecting women's rights. So
yes.
We're big on that one.
And she's trying to make gun safety stuff.
I think it's my choice. I don't want a kid. I'd rather kill it than have it live a miserable life.
You guys believe in God?
No.
In some way, sure.
And what about Trump? Do you dislike him?
No.
He's pretty funny.
He is. I repost all the funny moments.
All right, you should vote for him.
No, thank you.
I'll have to ask my roommate on that one.
Wow.
Yeah. But, there is... Now, listen, I get that this is not the best and brightest on the other side.
It does... I will say, though,
Go ahead.
It is... I don't want to say it's instructive because I don't want to say that everyone who might vote for Kamala would feel that way. But what I do think is generally true, I saw this constantly. So when Senator Cruz ran for re-election in 2018, we were all over Texas. We barnstormed the state, did dozens and dozens of events. And whenever I would grab people after our rallies and get them on camera and say, why do you like Senator Cruz?
Right.
It was because he's strong on the Constitution, Second Amendment, wants a secure border, all that kind of stuff. It was all about the policies. You know? If I asked people, and at the time he was running against Beto O'Rourke, who for all his imperfections as a candidate, developed an almost cultish-like following. Like, it was, I have to give him credit for that. It was very impressive. But he had huge rallies, and you'd ask people why you like Beto O'Rourke, and they'd say, because he's so inspiring, because he's so passionate. It was all
interesting.
It was all the kind of, how does he make me feel kind of stuff. And I do think there is that kind of generalization that people on the left tend to be more emotional in their kind of decisions about who they vote for. And people on the right tend to be a little more analytical and about the policy aspect of it. And so the reason that video doesn't surprise me at all is because they said, well, why do you like Kamala? And he's like, because she's cool, you know, because I like her. You know, it's like they can't really name any real policies that they back. And that's true of a lot of these man on the street interviews where they'll ask people, like, can you name one of her accomplishments? And they're like, oh, I have to get back to you. You know? So, So it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I mean the part that the way you reacted is exactly how I reacted, and it's exactly how my wife reacted when they talk about protecting female rights, and she says, I'd rather kill a baby than have to give birth to, or however she phrased it. Right. It's just horrible. And I just want to say up front too, what I'm not trying to do in this, or what I'm trying to communicate, is telling people that, hey, if you're not a full-fledged supporter of this candidate, then you don't understand the Bible and you're not a Christian. And I'm not trying to say that. What I am, but I mean, I do think there are certain policies that are so anti to Scripture. I mean, just so counter what the Bible teaches, either explicitly or by implication, that I think sometimes people go, they don't. Here's what I'm frustrated by. Let me just say it like this. There is no such thing as like neutrality in politics. And that is the frustrating part when people talk about politics and they go, we want a separation of church and state, not understanding at all what that comes from. But they, it's like, well, we don't want to tell people what to do or what religion. And, we want to just be neutral. Our government should be neutral. Our country should be neutral. And there's no such thing as neutrality. Every policy is dealing with people, and all of it comes from your moral perspective and moral worldview. Right. What are you going to do? We're going to say your Christian, worldview at the door and go, you do whatever you want. I think that's okay.
That's what I always, when the topic of same-sex marriage was argued a lot, people would say, "Oh, we can't legislate morality," and it's like that's literally all we legislate. That is like is like all the laws that we have.
The irony of that whole statement,
right? It all comes to a fundamental belief about what right and wrong are that comes from a moral perspective, and it's like you can't say, "Well, this is one area that we're not going to say we're going to legislate morality."
Are you familiar with Dave Rubin, the Rubin Report?
Oh yeah.
So
another guy who used to be on the left and is now totally conservative. Yeah.
Right. And
by the way, I actually met him at I met him at a I did a little bit of work for the Ron DeSantis campaign when he ran for president. So there was a function that he had that Dave Rubin was at. Dave Rubin lives in Florida. And and I introduced myself to him and I said I have to tell you, I said your interview that you did with Larry Elder, because that was his that was the one. That was the one that he totally blew his mind. And he said, he goes, that was my awakening. So that's where it all started. So
well, that's exactly how I found it. That clip had gone viral on YouTube or something like that, and I clicked it, and I was like, whoa, just getting battered, But anyways, if people have seen the clip,
Larry
go
Elder
watch
is
it.
Brilliant. Like, I love Larry Elder.
It was almost like he came with a bazooka, and Dave was not ready for it, So, but anyways, he said something that was very interesting. Probably 6 months ago, he was talking with Jordan Peterson, whom he traveled with Jordan Peterson the whole last tour, and he said that by the end of it, he was a theist. Beforehand, he was just kind of an agnostic, wasn't really sure, but he was a theist.
Dave Rubin said he was a
Yes.
theist? Okay, good.
And he said that he felt sympathetic towards Christians who didn't want to legislate gay marriage because of all the doors it's open now. And he is a man, if you don't know, who is gay and married. So it's just interesting. But all we do is legislate morality.
Yeah. I don't want to steer us off into that
No, go ahead.
totally different direction, but there's a really great organization that's on social media, and particularly Instagram, is where I follow them. But Gays Against Groomers, which is a group of gay and lesbian kind of activists who are alarmed at what they're seeing with kind of the sexualization of children, with whether it's trans ideology or essentially pornographic content in schools and things like that. And they're basically raising an alarm and saying, look, all the things that the Christian conservatives said about gay marriage, you guys are making it happen. Like all the scare tactics.
Because when you open the floodgates,
yeah, all that stuff you're making them into, you're fulfilling these things that they said would happen. And so, and what's interesting is Gays Against Groomers has now been labeled a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center, and it's just crazy stuff. Like they've been banned on Reddit, banned on
Reddit.
I don't know if it's Reddit. I might be,
but still,
there's a couple places where they've been banned.
Wow,
and it's like literally all they're doing is trying to sound an alarm about the sexualization of children, and so there
Which
are
is a good
I mean there are people who are having their eyes opened to some of these realities that are just, I agree with you. Like I also, I'm with you. Like I never want someone who is on the left side of the spectrum to feel like I won't have a conversation with them, or that I'm going to immediately point a finger and say that they're stupid.
Right.
I mean, I think I love,
I have friends who disagree with me.
For sure. Yeah.
And we love each other and we can talk because we have a relationship there.
Yeah.
And it's not a blockade for me. Now, obviously, there's a limit to, like, you have to agree with people on certain things to work with them on certain things. Like, there's just some level of agreement you have to have there.
Right.
But I'm not doing mini cancels, like kind of culture does with my friends if we disagree on border policy or we vote for different people.
Right.
I think he's wrong and he thinks I'm wrong.
Yeah. I think one of the it's funny. I've had a few cases where I have had friendships get severed with people who are on the other side of the spectrum. Right. Almost without exception. I'm trying to think if there's any that aren't. It has been the other person that decided to sever it because they couldn't handle the fact that I supported Trump or anyone else. And look, I am a Trump supporter. Like I do think he can be his own worst enemy, but
sure.
But I also, I know that there are well-meaning people who are on the left side of the spectrum, and so I really appreciated just recently. Megyn Kelly was on Bill Maher's show, and he basically opened it up saying the reason that they could sit there and have a conversation with each other is that while they might want to wring each other's necks about certain issues, they also acknowledge that the other person is not stupid.
Right.
And so it's almost like, okay, I know you're an intelligent person, therefore I need to understand how you can think this, Then you can actually have a meaningful conversation. But if someone comes out of the gate and says, if you support Trump, you're therefore a racist, sexist, homophobe, whatever it is, you can't have a conversation at that point.
Right.
And there's a lot of, I remember starting to see sort of the thought processes or the thinking that was starting to bubble up among people on the left that was like, oh, if you're not, if you support Trump, then you can't possibly be for human rights, and therefore we can't be friends. There's no more agree to disagree at this point, And so I'm like, okay, but don't then turn around and lament the division in politics when you're the one kind of drawing the line in the sand, So yeah, I mean, I think
that's a great point.
I think it's important. I want to be able to have conversations, but
that's a great point because there have been people I've thought I would love to chat with you about this or that, regarding politics, and the fear on my end is not I'm scared to say what I think. It's, are you going to be like upset with me if we disagree? I'm not going to come at you personally. You know what I'm saying? And obviously I don't have that thought all the time. It's not like everybody I run into, I'm like, oh, but there have been times where, anyways.
Yeah. Well, you just don't know, you just don't know how someone, if someone has the capacity to sort of separate. I think this is the problem with identity politics. Is it's not.
Yes.
It's not you have a disagreement with something I believe in. It's you have a disagreement with me. Something about me bothers you. It is kind of like I end up people who accept identity politics feel like you're attacking them instead of whatever position they might hold. So,
yeah. Well, there was a young man during kind of the whole defund the police thing, and that was really getting louder and louder. Mm-hmm. And he was like, "Why are we not talking about this in church?" And I thought I need to handle this carefully, but the reason he was so passionate about this is what he follows on his phone, like the accounts he follows, the people that are in his life. He comes from a broken home. Mm-hmm. There's a narrative in his head. And I also want to be compassionate, and he's a real human, and I do want to have some sense of, I think, some sense of humility in this, of going, okay, maybe my perspective's wrong in this, but I just told him, I said, hey, just so you know, to defund the police, that mantra, here's kind of what's behind that. And defunding the police would be a horrible idea. Mm-hmm. Like a god-awful idea. Mm-hmm. I was just talking to a buddy of mine who lives about an hour and a half outside of Oakland. Mm-hmm. And right now the average time, if they even respond, is 95 minutes. Wow. So you could be getting robbed, and crime has gone up. And he said that last year, in terms of percentage of guns bought, Oakland was the number one spot in America. Because you think, imagine a criminal who goes, "Oh, I can go do this. Right. I got at least 95 minutes. Mm-hmm. That's the average until the authorities are going to get there." Right. So it's just, but I had to talk with him, and I remember him saying this to me about a half hour into the conversation. He goes, "Okay, that's interesting. I haven't thought of that." And I was like, yeah, listen, the reason people are saying defund the police is not just because of what you're saying. There's more to it. And I was just trying to help him see, like, dude, sometimes the stuff you see on social media and the news outlets you follow and all, like, can just feed this machine in you, this narrative. And we got to think critically. Christians are called to think critically.
Well, and that's a very good point. And one of my biggest things I lament most about the way that we do education in the country is that there's virtually no teaching on critical thinking in K through 12 education. So it wasn't until I got to Gonzaga where I had to take the core curriculum, and it included 3 philosophy classes, and it was 101, 201, and 301 were respectively critical thinking, logic, and ethics. And I got so much. Those are probably the 3 best classes I've ever taken in my life, because because it just set me up for, it gave me the tools to kind of like engage with the world in a thoughtful way. It was not telling me what to think. It was telling me how to think and how to see fallacies in arguments, and how to discern truth. If you don't automatically have empirical evidence in front of you, how can you kind of like discern the validity of something? And so so it a lack of critical thinking, I think, is exactly what was illustrated in that video clip, right? Because there was no real intelligent thought or critical thought behind what they were saying. So, and I think partially, the jaded part of me wonders if that might be by design, because there are forces that benefit when you have a fairly ignorant citizenry that'll just adopt and accept whatever they see in front of them. Yeah.
And of course, people do that on the right as well.
100%.
All the time.
100%.
And even though I might share some conclusions with them, the reason why might be totally different, And so just to be fair, but I want to read this. So let me read you this. My buddy Nathan wrote something called My Political Essentials.
This Finocchio?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. And I thought it was really great, but these are him and I were traveling this summer, and we had talked about politics, and I was telling him, hey, I want to read more on this, and it's not that like, oh, I want to be consumed with politics, and it's actually a very small fraction of what I read, but like when you say, oh man, this book challenged me, and people I trust or whatever, like I take those and I want to shelf them and go, okay, I'm gonna add this to the list, right? And he's well read in political philosophy, loves it. And so I was very curious when he wrote this article. And here's his 10. Number 1, people are inherently and prone to evil. This is why government should be small. It trends in tyranny. So this is exactly what we were talking about earlier.
That's right out of the Federalist Papers.
Number 2, paradoxically, laws should be few. While people are evil and need governing, paradoxically, government is capable of more evil because of power. Thus, fewer laws should be the aim. Now, some of these are a little bit longer, so I might skip over a few of them, or not skip over some of the lines and details within. Number 3, nations, not tribalism or empire, are a good idea. So he essentially talks about in this, the ideas of a border and a citizenship, those things matter. Number 4, the family is the basic building block of all society, not the individual. Number 5, the church should influence government, and the government must not influence the church. Number 6, government should be local. States' rights are imperative to keeping peace in a diverse nation. Number 7, foreigners must acclimate. Number 8, energy must be the cheapest resource. It is a basic building block of every economy that serves to keep every price down. Only 2 more left here. 9, common people are greedy, not racist. People see one color, the color green. It's a good line. Number 10, all legislation is violent. You'll eventually be violently apprehended if you don't pay your parking ticket. Your assets will be forcibly confiscated if you rack up debt, which is why Christians must participate in the violent political machinery of legislation making, so that good laws are made, so that the land is cleaned of bad violence, and that redemptive violence is the only kind that the people will experience. Okay, there's a lot there.
That last one I'd have to chew on for a little bit.
Yeah.
But a lot of the things that he mentioned are, essentially founding principles.
Let me ask you this: if I were to ask you, and maybe I don't know you very well, and we're at a coffee shop and I overhear you talking, and I said, well, okay, you already voted, great. Who did you vote for? And you've already said it here in this podcast. What are the top 2 to 4 policies or reasons you are voting, the way you are this election? What would you say?
Well,
for you personally, what are the top ones?
Yeah, I think
putting you on the spot here.
They're sort of and I'm just talking about personally. This is just me personally. Yeah. And they're kind of one and the same. I feel like they're both equally important. Is one, a secure border. A secure southern border in particular, but a northern border also. And people say, well, how do you define that? Well, it's simple. Like, if no one can get in who's not supposed to, it's secure. If people are getting through, it's not secure.
Right. Illegally.
It is a massive problem. It has gone up like a hockey stick exponentially since Joe Biden took office. You can look at the numbers of illegal crossings, and it's just like a exponential kind of uptick in the curve. I personally spent time at the southern border with Congresswoman Kat Kamak of Florida. We spent about 3 days down there. Did some briefings with law enforcement there and Border Patrol, and actually went and did an actual visit right at the border in a small town called Roma, which is right on the Rio Grande River. I have video on this on my Facebook page. It's a public link, so you can go to my Facebook page and see the video that I created. But it's about 14 minutes of footage of what we experienced.
If you send me the link, I can put in the description as well.
I'm happy to
for
do
people
it.
to watch. Sure, yeah.
But we watched close to 200 migrants cross the river into the arms of Border Patrol and the National Guard. And I'm not talking like it's not like we sat there with binoculars. I could have reached out and touched these people as they walked past us, and
just in the middle of the day or
middle of the night.
Okay,
it's like 2:00 in the morning.
Okay,
and you can just see like there's a couple moments where Congresswoman is talking to members of the National Guard, and they're just like, we don't even understand what we're doing here. I thought we were going to at least be trying to keep our border secure, but we're just welcoming these people in. They just come in.
How long ago was this?
This was in 2022, I think.
Okay,
like July 2022.
Now, when they say that, sorry to interrupt you, but when they say that, what are they restricted to do at that moment based on the policy
their whole
that was in place.
kind of mission there is to process people and to get them, make sure they're okay, get them into some kind of a temporary shelter. It's like they can't even, like if a migrant comes across with a backpack, they're not even allowed to search the backpack.
No way.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. When Congresswoman asked him this, he says, "Yeah, we're not allowed to
fly,
look into the stuff."
I went to a Blazer game the other day.
Yeah.
They made me empty my pockets. I went to a Portland Trail Blazer game.
Oh, I know, dude. I'm telling you, people need to. The reason I made that video public on my Facebook is because I was like, people need to see this for real. I was there for 3 hours in a very, very narrow part of the border on one night, and this is happening all across the border every night. Thousands and thousands of people a day, and so. And that's also, like, they also said to us, they said, oh, don't be alarmed if when we get there, migrants see us and start, like, running toward us. Like, the ones, because for them, if you can picture it, like, there's a lot of people who have been wrongly told that all they have to do is go to America and they can have freedom and they can have a new life, And it's like, oh, my gosh, if I could just get there, like, I could do all kinds of things for my family. And so they're coming here believing that we're just welcoming them with open arms.
Yeah.
They get to the Border Patrol and they are so like, thrilled because they've made it, right? Like, I'm in America.
Yeah.
They also, this is crazy, like this is 100% true. The cartels mark people because it's also a human trafficking deal. So a lot of these people have paid cartels to give them safe passage through these areas. Thousands of dollars per person, right? And you're talking about thousands of people a day. So you can think about, in addition to all the drugs and guns and everything else they do, the money they're making from kind of shepherding people into the U.S. illegally is just, it's huge. It's huge. And they would mark people with these plastic wristbands like you'd get like at a nightclub or something, And what was crazy is when they cross into America and they're actually with Border Patrol, one of the first things they do is they cut these wristbands off because that to them represents freedom. They're not indebted to the cartels anymore. They're now across.
Oh, wow.
And so near the border, you can look down on the ground, and I'm not kidding you, you can see hundreds of these wristbands all over the place.
Wow.
I saw at one point in the video that I shot that's on my Facebook page, a raft comes up with a bunch of migrants in it, and a woman hands her newborn baby over to one of the Border Patrol to hold while she gets out of the raft. This baby had a wristband around it.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, you watch this stuff and you're like, how is our government allowing this to happen? And these are the people, mind you, these are the people who want to be processed. What you hear a lot in the conversations among people talking about border issues is the term gotaways, right? Gotaways are the people who don't want to get caught, either because they intend to do us harm, because they're running guns or drugs or human trafficking, or they have criminal records, or they're tied to, transnational gangs. And so those people, don't want to be caught. When they get through, we actually, in order to call them a gotaway, we actually have to have some form of evidence that they got through and we didn't get them, right? So we have to have some awareness that they made it,
right.
And were able to evade capture. It's currently estimated there's about 1 million gotaways in the United States. 1 million people, all right? It's like, 3 Tri-Cities,
Yeah.
Of people who are not supposed to be here, who didn't want to be processed, who probably have some sort of criminal past or intent. And, and that to me is pretty terrifying. It took 13 people to bring the nation to its knees in 9/11,
Yeah.
And so, it's frightening. So back to your earlier question, Border Patrol or border security is absolutely essential.
Yeah.
Milton Friedman also said, he's a Nobel Prize-winning economist. He said you cannot have a large welfare state and open borders.
Yeah.
Because you will inevitably collapse your own economy. That's essentially what we have now. We have,
and there's this weird thing, and I know this is a little bit of a caricature, but there's this weird thing where sometimes I think people think that if you do want a closed border, a strong border, we have complete control of who comes in and who doesn't. That must mean that, you hate Hispanic people, or you hate Canadian people, or you hate immigrants, or my grandparents are refugees to this country,
right?
And they fled communism in Cuba, and I have friends of mine who are immigrants, and I think that's great and wonderful, but it is so I'm trying to be charitable here, but I can't think of one good reason why anybody would actually want an open border.
Well,
not one.
Yeah, and I think it's important to be charitable, right? Like that's why I said you have to look at it from the perspective of these people who have been told all you have to do is get to America. I remember when my ex and I moved from LA to Austin, we took the 10 freeway and it goes right through El Paso. There's a section in El Paso that you can literally look past the border fence and see Mexico right on the other side, and it's like, kind of slums and very kind of dilapidated, and I can only imagine what it must be like to live there and to just be able to look across the border fence and see America and think, oh, if I could just get over it.
Especially if you have a rough life.
And
you've been told.
Yeah, and
you
just
get
have
there,
that, right.
Yeah.
So I don't blame inherently the migrants who are crossing.
No.
I blame the people who have told them that America's open. I blame officials who create incentives for them to come. I think
the cartel.
For sure. I mean, it's like, I think birthright citizenship is very flawed. If you have, what do we have now? I think they were saying 11 million. The number was 11 million illegal immigrants. Is that, okay.
Oh, you're good.
Okay.
You're good.
I think they were saying 11 million illegal immigrants that we've had in this country, but the number's been 11 million since I was in high school. So it's not even close to that now. It's got to be upwards of 25 million or so.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just heard it was closer to 22, and they said they believe that is even low.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So if you have,
which is a lot.
Right. So if you have essentially 25 million people who shouldn't be here, who are then here having kids who are automatically American citizens because they're here. What does that do? And I'm talking about racial demographics, and this is the hard part of the conversation. Is as soon as you start to have talk about these kind of issues,
it wouldn't matter if we were planted in the middle of Europe,
right?
With 100 nations surrounding us. You don't have a nation without a border,
right? And you have certain customs, and I mean, it's funny. Our motto is E pluribus unum, from the many one, that there should be a sense of unity, that while we are quote unquote a melting pot, that we still have or should have an idea of shared values and shared purpose, and that liberty would be one of the top top missions, and the fact is, like, we're bringing people into the country that don't necessarily share those values, and in fact, people like me are called a racist if we suggest that people should try and adopt those values before coming here, and so it's just, and I think that one of the tough things about it's tough to have good faith arguments about these kind of issues with people, because as soon as you say, well, people come here and they have kids and those kids become citizens, and so you're worried about replacing white people. That's your problem because you have a racist worldview. Right. It's like, no, it's just tough. I remember we talked about, you texted me once about the idea of Christian nationalism. I have to be so careful if I'm talking to someone, because I know if I say Christian nationalism, I know what that means. But I don't know what the other person thinks of that.
Yeah.
Then they immediately think, well, you're talking about white supremacy.
Yeah.
And so it's like, no, I'm not. But this is where critical thinking is important. To say, well, race isn't a part of. When I say Christian, that's not a racial thing. That's a religious thing. When I say nationalism, that is about a state. It's not about a color of someone's skin. So I always have to remember that when I'm answering someone's challenge, I'm not just answering the challenge, I'm answering the challenger or the person behind the question, And so it's really important, I think, to like when someone just asks me a question, a lot of times it's vague enough that I'll make sure that I'm figuring out exactly what they're asking me. How are you defining this term that you're asking me about? You know, someone says, "What do you think about Christian nationalism?" Well, how do you define that? Like, what does that mean to you?
Yeah.
And I think what happens is well, don't you know what it is? You know, it's like that kind of stuff. It's like, well, then you don't want to have a real argument. So
right. No, that's great. Okay, quick detour, but I want to come back to what would be maybe the next two policies.
Okay, yeah.
No, but that's
I got on the
no, that's good though.
Border thing quite a bit.
It's good. Yeah, and I mean, honestly, I had to stop myself because I was going to make another comment. I'm like, we're just going to stay on the border, but I don't want to just stay there the whole time. You saw, I'm assuming you saw, this is a little bit of the side note, but I'm assuming you saw Trump was on Joe Rogan's podcast. Did you hear?
I saw that he was on it. I didn't see the podcast yet. Yeah.
I listened to the whole thing. Very interesting.
Yeah, I bet.
I didn't know how it was going to go, you know, and I thought if somebody, it was interesting because it did not feel like an interview in the sense of this is Donald Trump or whoever on 60 Minutes. It did not feel that way. And Trump definitely has this ability to start here and just, you know, and then there's a story and, Senator so-and-so and their daughter and, you know, I built this.
Right.
And you're like, where are we going?
Yeah.
And Joe did it a few times, would go, hey, that's good. I want to bring you back, though, to what I was asking because people already know that. And here's what I don't understand. And so he did that. It was very good. But I will say I listened to this thing where Joe Rogan, you know, he does these I forget what they're called, but when he's not commentating for the UFC there, his buddies come and you can't watch it because you have to pay to watch, but they're commentating, you know, shooting the breeze or whatever, and talking about it live while the UFC stuff is going on. So this is before any of the fights, and they're asking him, how do you think it went? And he was like, dude, it was kind of impressive. He goes, honestly, we did 3 hours and 5 minutes. He didn't pee before he got here, didn't take one drink of water or coffee, did nothing, sat down, talked to me for 3 hours, and when he left, he was 2 hours late for this thing in Michigan, and he said, I don't care. He goes, my son said this is going to be a bigger deal anyways.
Yeah.
You know, and it was just funny because Trump goes, so do you think your podcast would be this big if you didn't do the UFC? And I'm thinking, dude, you obviously don't understand Joe Rogan's poll.
Right.
All that being said, though, I thought it was interesting. I thought it was worth listening to. And at one point, they talk about immigration and voter ID. And this is just a quick side note I wanted to make on this, but Joe said, was talking about how there's this new law in California. Maybe I'm wrong about this. I'm pretty sure I'm remembering it right. That you can't even ask for identification. Yeah. It's illegal to ask for identification now when someone goes to vote. There can't be anything like that.
Yeah, I heard a story too of people who like voluntarily tried to show their ID, and it was almost like
they could
showing a vampire a crucifix. You know, it's like I can't look at it. No, like, but it's wild. But I mean,
so Joe goes, and Joe is not a Trump guy, like, or at least historically has been. He, in fact, for years he says I would never have Donald Trump on, and he says, I guess there's only a few reasons why they're doing this in California. He goes, one, you know, this. He goes, or they want them to vote. And he goes, and I don't want to put on the tin hat right now. He goes, but he goes, I don't really see, like, he goes, I really don't understand why it is such a bad idea to require an ID. He goes, I can't even think of, like, if I was going to go to the other side on this, he goes, and I was going to try to argue for it, he goes, I couldn't even come up with a good argument. And you do wonder, why is this such a big deal? And we could go off onto a bunch of possibilities, but it's just bonkers what's happening in some states. And anyways, but
this is a part where I got to be a little careful about how
we can move on to
this. No, it's a good question because so you asked about some of my biggest policy deals. I said the border was one.
Yeah.
Neck and neck, if not tied with it, is election integrity. and making sure that the people who vote in our elections are citizens, and that anyone who's not a citizen does not vote in our elections. And that the ballots that are cast are actually cast by the people who the ballots went to.
And I think both sides of good faith people, everybody, regardless of what you think about the Jan 6 stuff and everything else, everybody should just want fair election that everybody can have somewhat of a trust in.
Yeah.
I think that's reasonable.
So I think, this is the kind of more slightly jaded, cynical part of me is that you made the comment of, why is this such a big deal? Like, it shouldn't be. These should be kind of slam dunk questions. But if you have powers that have a vested interest in making elections not secure, or like it's right now there's a lot of so voter ID, they'll push back on voter ID, but it's racist if you suggest that people need voter ID. Meanwhile,
so stupid.
And they always bring up like a remote 88-year-old African American grandmother who lives in the Ozarks, who's never been on a plane and never bought alcohol and never, and how dare we disenfranchise her, right? Yeah. So I think there are people who would rather allow 10,000 illegal votes as long as we don't disenfranchise one person, and it's a recipe for disaster. And so I think what really bothered me is, so I'm just going to be honest about this, and I know that this is sort of a political hot potato for a lot of people, but I personally don't think that there is a universe that Joe Biden won the 2020 election fairly. I think it was absolutely fraudulent. Now, the problem with that is that's very, very hard to prove, because fraud can happen in a multitude of ways, and any single one can be dismissed as, well, that was just a small thing, and it doesn't mean that it was widespread, and it doesn't mean that it would have changed the election. And so you basically have to catch every single method and have sort of an aggregate estimate of what the effect was. But what I do know is that it's very odd to have suddenly dozens of quote-unquote election irregularities that all kind of magically help the same candidate. There were statistical anomalies that were very, very odd about that election. And then to have the people in charge come out and say that 2020 was, quote, the most secure election of our lifetimes, when we know that COVID caused all kinds of chaos, right? We suddenly had almost universal mail-in ballots across the country. It's kind of like, you cannot tell me that the first time we do that, that it just goes off without a hitch, and that there's just no problems at all. And so we know for a fact that mail-in ballots are the easiest form of voting to commit fraud with. And so the idea that when we go en masse to mail-in ballots that everything was fine, it just doesn't even pass the smell test to me. And so
can I just share one thought on that? And feel free to push back if you go, no, I disagree with you. You won't hurt my feelings.
Okay.
We were just talking about earlier.
Sure. Yeah, you're fine.
Here's where I agree, but this, I think the emphasis for me might be slightly different. I have no clue, and I'm not saying anybody has, has all the data in terms of the election, but I have no clue if there was election fraud. I think it's probably likely. I think anybody with a brain would say there's some wacky stuff probably goes on every election. To how much, I don't know. 1,000%. And I do think this is election fraud. It's just different than that, maybe. The whole Russian hoax, the whole government, which is so crazy that the government reached out to Meta. That is the most insane thing.
Right.
To suppress the Hunter Biden laptop story. And I'm not saying anything new here. I'm just going, why would the government tell? Well, I have some ideas maybe as to why, but social media platforms to not promote a story. The Washington Journal just had a headline that came out a month ago. is it time to get rid of the Constitution? And you're just like, what the? No, I know that not everybody, and I'm hoping that's just a loud minority. But the scary part is, I can't remember who said it, but culture always flows downstream from the cult. So wherever the cult is in a society, culture eventually, or the cult, leaks out, and eventually it gets down into culture. And there's much more stuff I could say on that, but I feel like it'd get me in trouble. So anyways, would you agree with that? I think there's probably some elections. Maybe I haven't seen enough data. I just don't know.
It's not even, I mean, it's
because you heard about the people who are deceased and they're still getting ballots.
Yeah,
and I just don't know.
Here's a good example of just a very close to home case of what could be used in election fraud. I moved away from Washington State in 1997. Okay, I was gone for 28 years. I just moved back 14 months ago. For the last 28 years, every 2 months, my mom has gotten a ballot in the mail for me. Every 2 years, yeah. Every 2 years. I haven't voted in 28 years, but the ballots keep coming. I'm one person. Like how many hundreds of thousands of people have moved out of Washington State that still have ballots going to whatever address they lived at? Who knows what's happening to those ballots? Who knows they might be going in the trash, but maybe not. It's crazy to me how many, like just now you're seeing the thing with Virginia, where Virginia is being essentially court ordered to put a couple thousand people who they know are not citizens back on their voter rolls because a judge said it was wrong for them to remove them. There are groups that have a vested interest in making sure that the elections are not secure, and any attempt to make the election secure is met with cries of either racism or xenophobia or dismissed as like conspiracy theory. How could you possibly believe that the elections aren't secure and that doesn't happen? It's every time anyone talks about the 2020 election and has any questions about it, they're immediately dismissed as like ridiculous and kooks, and when it's totally fair and normal to want to live in a country where if we don't have, this is the only thing you said, if we don't have a border, we don't have a country. I would say the same thing about secure elections. If you don't actually have a system where people can rationally and or legitimately choose their own leaders by vote, then it's like we don't really have the republic that we think we have, or the democracy. So,
so maybe someone's listening to this and they're wondering, okay, what does it have to do with Christianity? Or I was talking to kind of like a mentor pastor. He has like a mentor role in my life, and he was just telling me that last Sunday, he told, or 2 Sundays ago, he told his congregation, hey, I think it's a good thing to go out there and vote as a Christian. Not just as a citizen, but as a Christian. He said, he goes, and I would encourage you to vote, to keep these 2 things in mind when you vote. He said, oh, no, am I spacing the first one? Oh, he said, you should vote from your Christian morality, number 1. Biblical principles. In fact, my buddy has it's this chart. It's really great. In the middle, it's basically things that the Bible is really clear on, explicitly mentions. Then second, we have biblical principles. And then third, we have liberty and discernment. And, he's like, vote on those 3 things, use that chart. The second thing he said is you should vote for what is going to make this country prosper, and what is going to make this country safe, what is going to make this country, essentially prosper. And I anyways, all that being said, I think about this country in 50, 100 years from now, and it's like, I want to see it flourish and thrive because I actually care about my country. And I don't know how this became a weird thing to say, or not even weird, a bad thing to say, but America first is that is a biblical principle. saying my country first. People who have a problem with that, it's because they don't understand how priority works in Scripture. Like the Bible does say that a man who doesn't provide for his family, if he has a family, he's worse than an unbeliever. And so I am called to take care of my kids before I'm supposed to feed a homeless person. That doesn't mean I don't have compassion for a homeless person, but there's a hierarchy there. And so it's like I am actually doing a horrible job as a father if I give all the groceries away and I have no other food to somebody else, but I don't provide for my family. So it's like we have to do things that are going to benefit and flourish our country first, and from that flourishing, you can help and be a blessing,
right?
But not at the expense of the other. So, anyways, I just wanted to pause and make a note there. We should do things that want to see the flourishment of our own country.
Well, and I mean, I certainly would agree with you. I think that the problem is, and this is where I need to make a distinction. So, like a lot of times, I will talk about people who are on the left side of the spectrum, and that's a very vague, a vague way of putting it. There are people on the left side of politics that I would put into two different categories. You have people who would call themselves liberals or progressives, right? These are people who I believe are generally well-intentioned, right? I think they have wrong policies. I think their policies are destructive, but I do think that they have intentions to make the country better. I think if I were to sit with them, we would both agree that we want people to not be in poverty. You know,
maybe you would say, of course, there's Democrats who believe in the First Amendment. And they don't want to censor people. Like you guys can agree on some of those foundational things, but they disagree with you on tax brackets.
Sure.
But that's different.
But I distinguish the people that I would call well-meaning liberals from people that I would call leftists who embrace leftism, who are fundamentally Marxist in their theology or their political philosophy.
Right.
And so those people usually are very much against Western civilization, against Christian morality and just Christian values, and certainly against the United States. In fact, they would probably say the United States is the cause of a lot of the ills in the world. And so for them to say America first is very triggering. You know, they're going to be the ones that push back on that and say, if you say America first, you are therefore xenophobic and racist and all those things. And that's, I believe, where it comes from, is that philosophy. And sadly, I think more and more the Democrat Party is kind of being a little bit hijacked by the people who are on that side, that end of the spectrum, that far side. And that's why there's so many people who have moved to and crossed over and become Republicans. You look at people like Tulsi Gabbard, people like Dave Rubin, you know,
Elon Musk.
They would all say, it's not like we weren't the ones who moved. It was their party went so far left, or at least was so hijacked by people on the extreme fringes that the people who are the moderates, you know, had to basically kind of bow down to them. You know, it's like the squad, the AOCs of the party. It makes having those conversations really difficult. But
I want to ask you about this because I think this is a fair critique, and so maybe this is a good time to look inward. But we were talking about this briefly right before we started recording. But I understand that when people have a problem with Donald Trump, 100, like I could see the reasoning there, and or other figures in the Republican Party. I'm not saying this exclusively to him, but I think there's a difference. Some people who are maybe Christians, they might go, Donald Trump claims to be a Christian. I think he's on his third marriage, and he's and they might even say those divorces, none of them were legitimate, and he just keeps on and keeps on, and he's a committed, he's a felon, and which that's a whole nother thing. But he's done this, he's done that. There's all these allegations and whatever, and they go, okay, you may not like some of the policies on the other side, but they're not calling people this and that on Twitter, and they're not doing this, and I don't know how you would articulate it, but I just go for the president. I'm not looking for a pastor. You know,
Right.
I'm not voting for Trump even. I'm not voting for Trump because I go, man, what a role model.
Right. Yeah.
I think he's a business guru, tycoon, whatever, who, I mean, even J.D. Vance was a never Trumper like a few years ago.
Yeah.
And now he says that he sees him as like this necessary boulder. And he's the guy for the opportune time.
Yeah. So funny story.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Comment on that.
So I was a never Trumper at one point.
Oh, yeah, we've talked about that.
Yeah. So you know, flashback 2016. I'm working on Senator Cruz's campaign. It
I remember some of the remarks.
It goes down to Senator Cruz and Trump, and it is a very bitter and ugly primary between them. You know, this. He makes remarks about Senator Cruz's wife and his dad and stuff, and it's just, and we suspended the campaign in May of 2016 in Indiana, and I remember, and I took it hard, like it was a gut punch because I had poured heart and soul into the campaign, like everything was just all the passion I could put into the video products I created, and so I took it really hard. I remember, you know, people came from all over the country who were part of the campaign because they knew that we were going to suspend. And Glenn Beck was there with us. And I remember I was on the comms team, and so I was on the email chain that got the speech to be loaded into the teleprompter. And immediately I scrolled down to the end, and sure enough, I saw the line where he said, for these reasons, we decided to end the campaign. And I went and found a corner and just kind of wept. You know, it was rough. At the time, I didn't believe, because Trump was an unknown entity at that point in terms of the political sphere. I didn't know if he was a real conservative. I didn't know he was a real. I was pretty sure he wasn't a real Christian. There was a I can't think it was like the Faith and Freedom kind of conference or something, but it was in Iowa where each of the candidates came and sat essentially in front of a room full of believers, you know, and talked about their faith and stuff like that. And Frank Luntz, who's a pollster who's been on Fox News a lot and stuff, he was kind of the moderator. And he asked Trump, he said, have you ever asked God for forgiveness? And Trump actually kind of essentially said no. He said, no, I'm not kidding. Like you could almost
But he was being serious.
Yeah, you could almost hear the audible gasps in the room. This is, you can go online on YouTube and find this.
Didn't he say something one time like, nobody loves the Bible more than me?
Oh yeah,
or something that.
But he and I'll talk about that for a second. But he said, you know, I don't feel like I have. I've always tried to do my best and all that kind of stuff, and I just don't really feel the need to ask. You know, and I remember hearing that and thinking, there's no evangelical that can vote for him at this. You know, and so whenever he would be asked about Scripture and if he had a favorite Bible verse, could never list one.
Right.
He would talk about.
I'm more of a New Covenant or New Testament.
He would talk about a physical Bible that was given to him and how much it meant to him, and I just love the Bible so much. It's a cherished thing, but never about the contents of it. You know,
right.
And so I'm sitting there thinking, this guy is like pulling a fast one on the church, you know, and so a few weeks after we suspend the campaign, I get a phone call from a guy named Jason Miller. Jason Miller was the comms director for the Cruz campaign, ended up moving to the Trump team after we suspended the campaign. And so I got a call from him. He was my direct boss on the Cruz campaign. And so I picked up and he said, hey, I'm just wondering if you would be interested in coming and working for Trump and doing for Trump what you did for Senator Cruz. And he kind of sold it hard. He was like, dude, you're going to be on Trump Force One, and you get to meet the family, and they're all amazing, and our rallies are huge, and all that stuff. And any piece of gear you want, it'll be on the doorstep the next day. And I really thought about it, and I really didn't like Trump at that point. Just because I was still mad about the primary and the way that went.
Sure.
And so I ended up getting an okay from Senator Cruz, from Jeff Rowe, our campaign manager, and then Jason Johnson, who's our chief strategist. They all said, hey, if you want to do this, you have our blessing. We'll do it. And I called Jason the next day and I turned it down because I knew I couldn't pour heart and soul into the work the way I had done for Senator Cruz. And I didn't want to be just a hired mercenary just because someone wanted to pay me, you know. And now, fast forward Trump had for many conservative metrics what I would consider a very successful presidency. And so I had to give him credit for that. I also had to give him credit for getting a huge number of people who previously had not paid attention to politics, who were suddenly asking questions about how the economy works and what our immigration policies are and stuff like that. That to me is enormously helpful. I'm glad that, and just the kind of the big tent coalition and it's not just new people paying attention to politics. It's people who wouldn't have paid attention to politics otherwise. You have lots of people who are now suddenly considering. You look at right now a movement among particularly black men who are moving to the Republican Party. A lot of Hispanics are voting Trump.
I think they said, and I could be off on this, but this is what I remember. What I heard back, I think in August, was Trump had gotten 11%. I think it was black men in 2016. And at that time, he was polling closer to 29%. So almost a third.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
And that's after years.
And that's in August.
Yeah,
so I don't know.
And that's after years of everyone in America being told that Donald Trump is the most racist person who's ever been in office, right?
And that he's Hitler
So clearly that attack has not been working because I think in the end people people are living their lives. People are living their lives and they're seeing how hard it is just to make ends meet and get by, and they're seeing the cost of things, and they're seeing stories about all these wars going on and that we didn't have under Trump. So I want to point out for listeners, just if they're curious, there's one of the single best defense that I read about Trump's presidency. And it answers the question, how can you as a decent person support this guy who's so brash and horrible and says ridiculous things?
Right.
A guy named Evan Sayet, Sayet, he wrote a column titled He Fights, and it's in townhall.com, Town Hall magazine. And he just lays out kind of his response to someone who would ask him that question. In that article, he refers to Trump as the first wartime president in the age of the culture war. And so it was like, for the person who feels like they haven't had a true fighter fighting for them, Donald Trump represents that fighter. We've had,
whether that's true or not, that's what it represents.
Well, it's true or not, yeah. And it's because he's willing to go at these people who are on the left.
And I will say on that point, I've seen, and I kind of think this on both sides, but I saw yesterday Eminem and Beyonce and these different people, saying their thing for their candidate, and I got to be honest, it almost makes me like, oh, you're voting for them? I almost don't want to, you know what I mean? And I saw, the whole celebrity association with the campaigns doesn't do, and maybe it does for other people, it doesn't do a thing for me. Right. I cannot remember, somebody sent me this video from this gal. I don't even know who she is, never heard her name at all. But she has somewhat of a following, and she made this comment on Eminem. The real Slim Shady at the Kamala rally in Detroit. And she says, I just don't think this jives with anybody. And I was thinking that before watching this video. And she goes, here's the deal. When you have Beyonce go up there, just a multi-millionaire between her and her husband. She's like, and people are spending $5 more on eggs, and the gas is expensive, and nobody can buy a house. And then you see somebody up there who's worth $1 billion. This is why you should. It doesn't translate because it's just almost like, dog, you're not even in the same universe I live in.
Yeah. Now, I will say that there's someone on the other side could say to you, well, yeah, but Trump's a billionaire and he had Elon Musk on stage with him, right?
Exactly. But you're 100% right, and I've thought about that. The only difference I would make is this. Forgetting because obviously no celebrity has honest to God, has made any influence on who I'm voting for. So whether it's Elon Musk or whatever. But that's why I brought this up. It was so interesting about Donald Trump. He's so unrelatable to me in terms of like we have nothing in common. I was telling you how much I love J.D. Vance right before this. I think he's way more relatable than Donald Trump. But for whatever reason, Donald Trump does represent this. Maybe it's because I'm not part of the system. I'm getting shot at.
Yeah.
They're trying to put me in prison.
There's a lot to be said for that.
There's a lot
to be said for that.
There's a lot of factors in all this.
I think, I mean, it is funny. Like he's a billionaire, and yet he's the candidate that when you looked at the 2016 field of Republican candidates, Trump was the one that most people would be like, oh, I want to go have a beer with that guy. He just seemed fun and jovial and all, and for some reason that, people respond to that. And I think that that's something that I've tried to do in my own, in all the work that I did for Senator Cruz, but also for a lot of other candidates, is how do I bring that sort of sense of grassroots, organic enthusiasm that is about the fact that liberty is inspiring, liberty is cool, liberty is like all these things. I want to like engender the feelings behind that, not just the policy points, because I think conservatives largely don't do a great job about engaging people on a heart level, you know? And so I really, which I think is almost like philosophical malpractice, like if we have these great arguments that usher in safety and prosperity and all these things. I thought
Vivek did really good at that.
He's great. He's great. Yeah, I mean, Vivek talks about his 10 truths. One of which is the family unit being the greatest system of governance and all these things. That there are only two genders, and they kind of read a lot like the same things that Nathan Finocchio wrote about. For whatever it's worth, I think he is a very, very, very talented communicator of the conservative vision of the world. Anyway, I don't know where I was going with that.
Because we only got about 15 more minutes. Okay. We've been going for probably an hour and 20.
Oh my gosh,
7 minutes.
All right.
No, good. But if I had more time, I would say we could go as long as you're willing to. Unless you got to leave.
Nope.
Okay,
yeah, I'm good.
But let's spend the next few minutes on the top reasons for why you're voting the way you're voting. Maybe the next 7-8 minutes on that. And then we'll kind of end with some closing thoughts for the last 5.
So
we talked about border. What was the other one we talked about?
Election integrity.
Election integrity.
Yeah, those are huge.
Maybe 2 more. What are big reasons? Big policies or things?
The other, let's see. This is going to be a strange one because I would say fiscal restraint. I think that we are in an unbelievably precarious fiscal situation. If you look at the curve of our debt nationally over time, it is accelerating at an alarming rate. So we're getting deeper into debt, and we're getting deeper into debt much faster than we were before. We're running $1 trillion deficits every year. So actually, I think now we're running $1 trillion deficit every 100 days. Oh, so it's adding $3 trillion. Yeah, and mind you, we're 35 trillion in debt now. In 2012, I think I'm a little off on this. I think in 2012 we were like 12 or 13 trillion in debt, and so it's just. And government has to either raise taxes to raise revenue to pay for all the things, or they print money, right? Printing money is exactly why we're in the situation we're in now with all the inflation. There's I can't remember the last time I read the statistic that said something like 80% of the dollars that are currently in circulation were created within the last 2 years.
80?
Yeah. I mean, it was like this that are in circulation, that are being used actively, right? And so. And I should double check that to make sure that that's accurate. But
even if it's somewhat close.
Yeah. So government spending is a large, and this is I've been doing a lot of the campaign ads a lot of the shooting and editing for Jared Sessler's race here in this district. So
oh, cool.
Yeah. So basically,
I just voted today.
Uh-huh.
I voted for Sessler. Yeah.
So yeah, I met him at an event, and I personally had just, I don't want to say animosity, but I was put off by the fact that Dan Newhouse had voted to impeach President Trump, and not because I'm a Trump sycophant, like we talked about that. Like I'm not, but I do believe that Dan Newhouse and people who look at January 6th as the most horrible, darkest day in our history, have a kind of fundamental misunderstanding of what actually happened that day.
And I do. You can again feel free to push back.
Right.
I do think overall there's a lot of there's some net negative about Jan 6, and I some of it I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so ridiculous and stupid, and I want to acknowledge that. I also agree. I think it gets so blown out of proportion. And like you said, talked about like it's the darkest day of all human history.
I think the Babylon Bee might have just made a movie about it that was like the most deadliest day.
Oh my gosh!
Completely hyperbole, but But I do. I mean, there were people who were there committing crimes and committing acts of violence, and they were rightfully arrested and should be rightfully prosecuted.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? But the people who there's hundreds of hours of video of this where you literally are watching like Capitol Police. It almost looks like they're escorting people through the building, all the way up to the House chamber.
Yeah, it's very bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, it's people moving the barricades so that the crowd can come in. I mean, all that stuff is like on video, and so I just for I don't know, I'm getting into the weeds on this, but for Dan Newhouse to say, America needed a leader and Donald Trump failed us. I was kind of like, okay, this guy doesn't understand that there were people who felt like legitimately like there were problems with the 2020 election. And if you have no, what do you do if you see your country being taken away from you and you feel like you have no recourse? You can't. I do have obviously a problem with people who committed acts of violence. I don't have a problem, and I can sympathize with people who were angry about what they were seeing happen. Sure. So. All that to be said, I met Sessler at one of his events. I kind of heard his spiel, and then afterwards I introduced myself and kind of shared my background. And ever since then, I've kind of been doing his ads for him. And but why did I bring that up? I had a whole reason I was bringing up Sessler.
Oh, you're good. This happens to be all the time.
Yeah. Let me think.
So we were talking about we were talking about reasons why you are voting the way you're voting.
Okay. So yeah. So
fiscal
conservative, yeah. So the reason I bring up Jared Sessler is because he is very committed to lower taxes and lower spending. He's been endorsed by the House Freedom Caucus, which are some of the biggest deficit hawks like in Congress. I worry a lot about what it could look like if we actually have a financial collapse in the country. I think it would look much, much worse than the 2008 housing crisis. I think it would, potentially include like a level of suffering that I don't know if our country has seen a lot. So to me, it's tough because financial numbers and our national debt and stuff, it's not sexy. It's not like something that people can really wrap their heads around. A trillion is such an astronomical number.
It's hard to fathom.
Yeah, it takes, if you were to count to a trillion and you were to count 1 second each number.
Yeah.
A trillion seconds is a little over, like, I think it's 35,000 years.
Oh, yeah.
Is how long it would take you. So like, you can't, the numbers are so big, but I do think it's immensely important. But honestly, the bigger picture over all those things, so I named a couple, like fiscal restraint and border and election integrity. For me, the kind of big overarching philosophy, and this is something that Charles Krauthammer wrote about in the foreword of a book he wrote called Things That Matter. Things That Matter. He talked about what he called the supremacy of politics, or maybe it was the primacy of politics. The idea that you have to get the politics right in order to protect all the other things that we find meaningful about life. In order to have a culture where you can do art and philosophy and these other things, you kind of have to have a country where people are safe and people have, enough of the basic needs they have to get by.
Right.
In a country where people have immense suffering, you don't have a lot of philosophers. You don't have a lot of artists.
They're trying to survive.
They're trying to survive, yeah. And so I wish. I mean, the passage where he talked about that, it's so good, but it's a little verbose. So I will. I will clip it and I will make it a public post on my Facebook. So
there you go.
People, when they go watch the border video, they can see this quote. But it was just a very good encapsulation of just like, getting the politics wrong. The ramifications are just there's really no end to them. There's so many things can be lost if we don't get the politics right. So so for me, that's kind of why I care about it, and I would encourage believers to care about it too. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, do you got one more?
Let's see.
We got 5 minutes.
I think it's funny. You have these two ideas like progressives, progress, right? Conservatives, right? So you have progressives who would tell you that we're trying to progress into a better direction, a better tomorrow. Conservatives are kind of like trying to conserve what has worked in the past. And I feel like we can see our nation, like you can look back at the Constitution and the brilliance of how government was kind of set up that way, and see how, as we've gone through time, we've drifted further and further away from what the Constitution was intended. And so, I mean, Mark Levin and Mike Lee have both said this, that every day that Congress meets, we lose just a little bit of our liberty. And just a pretty like jaded, kind of cynical way to put it, but it does seem to be true. And when you have this was what was difficult. Like you watch the debates where you have two candidates on either side that are both talking about the importance of the Constitution, right?
Right.
But if you have one side that is trying to curtail freedom of speech, that wants to curtail the Second Amendment, that wants to limit states' rights, that that has all these different ways that they want to get rid of the Electoral College, right? They want to pack the Supreme Court. And then turn around and say, "Oh, but the Constitution is wonderful and we support it." It's like you have a platform that seems to dismantle so much of this. So I love the quote by C.S. Lewis where he says, progress means. Progress doesn't mean anything if you're already headed in a wrong direction.
Right.
In that case, progress means turning around and going back the way you came.
Right.
And so he says, in that manner, the person who turns around first is the most progressive. And so I feel like that's kind of where we are, and I feel like that's why I love the people who are former liberal Democrats who then turned around and came back the other way. It's like they saw the light. They saw the direction we were going, and I say this all because in with some hesitation, because I know our audience is going to have people that are, or your audience has people on either sides of the political thing, and I feel like they're going to watch this and be like, "Oh, we just watched a 90-minute love fest for Trump," and the reality is that there are policies. I'm big on judging policies by what their actual results are, not by what was intended. So. You can say you passed policy X with the intention to do something positive, but if it doesn't actually do that thing, then it needs to go.
Right.
And it's a big problem with government departments that are set up to address a problem. Almost have a vested interest in making sure that problem never actually gets solved, so that their department can continue on forever. If they solve the problem, then what is their relevance at that point?
Right.
And so Reagan had this joke about how. The closest thing to eternal life is a government department or a government bureaucracy. But I just really believe that the policies that I believe that generally conservatism does not have the perfect answer for every issue, but I do believe it has the best answer of the political philosophies that are available. And so the best answer, if you care about individual liberty, prosperity. Now, if only you care about is security and making sure that everyone's taken care of, then maybe I can see where someone goes, "Oh, communism sounds good to me." Then, but there are there's so many reasons why that's never worked. So that's where I land on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And I mean, I know we've said this kind of multiple times, and it's obvious, but obviously. We could have spent much more time critiquing Trump, but I think the point is, I mean, you were just talking about policies, and you don't care so much as to what the intention was, but the actual result. I'm not saying it doesn't matter completely, but I think most people going to run for office are going to be pretty imperfect, and there might be better or worse in terms of their character and integrity. But the thing about Trump that is at least helpful is I do think people know who he is. Like there's
now we
do,
yeah,
right.
For
I'm not
sure.
for good or for bad. Mm-hmm. There, I don't feel like people are like, I'm not really sure who he really is. Like there's some safety there. It's like I know his tendencies. I know, mm-hmm. And but anyways, I was mentioning, we don't care about intentions but results. If I just look at maybe not what he says or his personal value system, but just the policies that he actually put into place, mm-hmm. he got Roe v. Wade overturned. That's crazy. Mm-hmm. And I do think, living in the country we live in, I do think it's a pretty good idea to have the states decide it. I think that's the way it should be, mm-hmm. for sure.
Well, and even constitutionally, it's the way it should be, right? Yes, the Constitution says that it's very explicit, like that powers that aren't explicitly given to the federal government automatically go to the states. Yes. So that was also the same argument that that people like Senator Cruz was making when it came to same-sex marriage, because marriage isn't in the Constitution either, and so it should be a state issue. Constitutionally, it should be a state issue. But yeah, I mean, it's sorry, I lost my train of thought again.
No, you're fine.
I think I don't know. I think you're right about the idea that people know who Trump is now. I think one of the problems is that people get so entrenched in their worldview and can be so resistant to being challenged on it. Even if there's truth mm-hmm. behind the challenge, I do blame a lot of that on social media. I think social media has a large responsibility and a large blame in how polarized we've gotten. It's like you have an algorithm that basically is built to feed you mm-hmm. whatever you're going to engage with, and it's just a little dopamine machine, right?
Mm-hmm. And they say you're most likely to engage. This is just generic, mm-hmm. but stuff that you really disagree with, mm-hmm. or stuff that's really funny.
Yeah, I mean, anger is a really powerful motivator.
Totally.
And that's true. That's one of the reasons why you see negative political ads in the cycle. So people can be at home going, I can't believe he voted for that. I'm going to go. They actually, in fact,
having a common enemy unites people really quickly.
This was interesting. Yeah. There was a study, and I'm not going to say where I got this from, but this was like some inside knowledge that
sure.
there was. A survey that was done that found that whenever Trump would enter a race based on who he endorsed or something like that, it would usually end up in a 6-point negative differential for the candidate that he was endorsing, because as soon as he jumped in, it would enrage people on the other side so much that they would come out just to stick it to him for endorsing somebody. So if Trump endorses that guy, we gotta take him out.
Wow.
And so I don't know how accurate that was.
Sure.
But it just speaks to the fact of anger and hatred being a very powerful motivator in our human nature.
Absolutely.
And that's partially our own fallen nature, right? The fact that those things motivate us as much as they do.
Yep.
But I do, about the whole polarization, that documentary on Netflix, The Social Dilemma, is such a fascinating kind of. It's really well done. But they talk about a lot about the fact, just the way that it kind of pushes people into extremes. Well,
maybe I have seen it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and they even have this fake movement. They call them like the extreme centrists, mm-hmm. Which don't exist, but but just to be unbiased in how they tell the story. But I do think that the guy that, for instance, that you brought up earlier when we were talking about the defund the police movement, like he's seeing a constant barrage of messaging about police who are killing defenseless black men and women, and of course if that's all you're seeing, of course you're going to start to develop a belief that is,
and things I've been wrong on.
Yeah. Sure,
are been largely due to that stuff like that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, mm-hmm. There's been stuff I've been corrected on.
But I think too that's the tough part. That's where it requires back to what we were saying earlier, to bring it full circle, is a society where people learn to think critically, so that they can question their own biases.
We keep talking to each other.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
For sure.
Okay, well, just maybe to kind of wrap up here, I think for me, there's a handful of things within theology that I go, these are closed-handed. You're not changing my mind. You'd have to prove that this or this is wrong, and then I'll hand it up. But like unchanging, this is core to the faith. And then there's that second level of these are very important, but my mind could be changed. And then there's that third level of we might disagree on the end times stuff, but we're still brothers and sisters in Christ.
Right.
And I do think that if somebody is watching or listening to this and are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, or whatever, and or maybe you totally agree with us and you're like I can't wait to talk to my family at the dinner table tonight or something.
Right.
Just I think it is healthy theologically, politically, philosophically. What are the anchor things that's like I am not going to, these are essential. And then as St. Augustine said, in the essentials. Oh, now I'm spacing it. We've been talking too much. But he says in the non-essentials, liberty or charity. And to be charitable to all people and all things when we're talking about non-essential stuff. And so I think in politics, it's like, I do think less taxes is good. But I'm not going to lose my mind over somebody who disagrees with that.
Right.
But I do think there are some things that are more essential than others.
Yeah.
So and I think knowing that helps because then not everything's a ticking time bomb for you.
Yeah. And not everything is attached to your identity.
Yes.
And I think that's, I obviously agree with you. I think that there's a lot of issues. I mean, people say don't talk about politics or religion in polite company, right?
Chesterton says that theology and politics are the only things that are worth talking about.
Yeah, right. Because those are fundamentally worldview issues, right?
Yes.
And people believe these things on a very deep, visceral level.
Right.
And so when they're challenged, it's especially when people are challenged and they're not prepared to defend what they believe. Those are the people who I find tend to get angry the quickest. People who have actually thought and can articulate why they believe what they do typically aren't offended by challenges because they know how to answer the questions.
Right.
A lot of times they'll even welcome it. Bring on the questions. Charlie Kirk sitting there with his, or what's the other guy's name?
Crowder.
Yeah, Crowder.
The change my mind table.
Right. Kind of bring it to me. You only do that if you have a fundamental, strong conviction in the things you believe. But I think that was one of the things that I had trouble with in Hollywood was that I would hear, actors, directors, rank and file crew members openly bash things that I believed in on set. Now, I don't believe that the workplace is a place to talk about politics, but they apparently didn't feel that way.
Sure.
And so when I started to kind of diplomatically push back by just asking some challenging questions about some of the claims they were making, it was like I was met with this, how could you even question that?
Right.
Not an actual argument, but like you're mean for challenging me. And yeah, I feel like I hope people on both sides have the ability to check their own biases and to just think critically about who they're supporting and why. And this is obviously the most important point that I don't need to make to you, but I want to make sure that we say, in the end, our salvation is not going to come through the right political party or president.
Absolutely,
We are not citizens of this world spiritually, right? We can do our best to be stewards of the world that we have, and I think that's where choosing the right politics is crucial. But it's not the end game, right? So I do feel like I might disagree with someone politically. I might disagree with them severely politically, but I don't want to. It would be tragic to sacrifice that relationship because I might lose the opportunity to witness to them or to share the love of Christ to them,
Right.
I can do that in a loving way, even if I disagree with them, you know. And so I think this idea of like, you look at the Westboro Baptist Church holding up the sign that says God hates fags, or what, it's just like those people aren't winning anyone over to Christ, and so I think that and
their approach is wrong. Yeah,
I mean, it's just kind of like if I immediately other these people on the left side of the spectrum, then it's kind of like, where is my how am I going to relate to that? How am I going to have any ability to speak into their life in a way that provides life? By if I'm just pointing a finger at them and telling them they're wrong. I can disagree with them on policy, but it's just tough because if you're talking to people and you disagree with them on policy, but if they believe their political beliefs are tied to their identity, then you might cause them to shut off the relationship.
Right.
So I do try as best I can to be thoughtful about how I engage people who I don't agree with. I'm a fallen human being myself. I also get passionate about these issues, so I certainly don't do that perfectly, but I at least try and remember that in the end, what happens spiritually is far more important than what happens in the natural, and to remember that, I'm so one of the biggest things I'm thankful for is that I know and serve a God that one day is going to make every wrong in the world right again.
Yes.
And so I can get so angry, and this is something that even that Christians on the left should be thankful for too. They look around and they see the injustices that make them angry and mobilize them to vote a certain way. Like, God will right those injustices, and so when I look, I see all the, the deep state and all the conspiracy stuff that, you hear about. I don't know how much of that is true. I don't know how much of it I need to be alarmed about. I do know that God knows about all of it. Yeah. And that it will all be fixed one day. And that is in the end where I find my hope. As much as I work in politics and spend my time kind of devoted to that in the arena professionally, I know that that's not the main thing. So I just felt like that was important to say. So
absolutely, that's a great point. Well, if you've made it this far in the conversation, thanks so much for sticking around. This was great. We honestly could have gone so much longer.
I know. I felt. We have coffee and we talk about all the.
I know,
and I appreciate the fact because I've always appreciated that you are also a philosophy kind of nerd and you like getting your head around issues of meaning and truth. And I mean that's another thing we didn't even talk about that is that when the nature of truth. I have always said when Jesus stood before Pilate and he said, Pilate said, "Are you the king? Is it true that you're the king of the Jews?" Or no, he said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus says, "What you say is true." And Pilate says, "Well, what is truth?" I believe that was the single most consequential philosophical question that could ever be asked. Like what someone believes about the nature of truth has ramifications for what they believe about anything.
Totally.
And what's interesting is in the age that we live in now is I feel like there's a consistent intentional erosion of truth, The transgender stuff is a very good point to,
The postmodern epistemology is going to destroy the fabric of this country.
Right.
It literally will. I mean, I don't know if we've talked about this before, but I have to first find out if I'm like kind of in an argument with somebody, not like we're yelling at each other, but just I have to find out philosophically where they're coming from, because if we can't agree philosophically, we will not agree theologically. Right. So
if you don't agree on what the nature of truth is, how do you even have a conversation? Right. It's like you can try.
Exactly.
Like I had this is funny. I had years ago when I lived in Los Angeles, I actually had a date with this woman that I had worked with, and we're sitting across each other from dinner, and she just casually, in the midst of conversation, throws out, she goes, "Well, perception is reality, so And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I said, wait a minute, do you actually believe that? And she looked at me and she was like, well, obviously, how could you not believe that? And so we end up in this like very long philosophical discussion, and it was like, it was very respectful, but we were clearly coming from completely different areas, and it was like we walked away being like, okay, you're a really cool person, but this would never work because a very, very fundamental, foundational thing is so diametrically opposed.
Yeah,
so,
interesting. Yeah, interesting. Well, thanks for listening, and I'll get the link for that video.
Yeah,
and you can click that down below in the description if you haven't watched it yet. But we'll see everybody in the next episode. Peace out.
Thanks, man.